Hello Year 3, I hope you're keeping well. In our science lesson today, we're going to be looking at the different parts of a flower and some of the jobs that they do. So on the next few slides, we'll be reminding ourselves of some of the names of the flower that we looked at when we labelled our diagrams last week. So on the screen in front of you, you will see the carpel, which is the female part of the flower, and you will see the stamen, which is the male part of the flower. So on the screen in front of you, we're just going to look a little bit more closely at some of these parts of the flower. So the first arrow is pointing to like a yellow part of the flower. This is the anther. The top of the stamen is called the anther. The second arrow shows the filament. The filament acts in the same way as a stem and it holds up the anther. Now what I want you to think about is this question. What is the yellow powder on the anther called? Just think about that for a minute. Did you get it right? Well done. It's the pollen. So on the screen in front of you, we're going to look a little bit more closely at the carpel, which is the female parts of the flower. So on the screen, you will see three arrows. The top arrow points to the top of the carpel, which is called the stigma. The middle arrow points to the style. The style acts in the same way as a stem and holds up the stigma. And the third arrow at the bottom of the flower is the ovary. The ovary contains the eggs. With your partner at school or someone at home, I want you to discuss what you think the term pollination means. You can use a picture as a clue. Pollination occurs when the pollen from the anther is transferred onto the stigma. Have a look at the screen in front of you and I just want you to pause for a minute and just think, what do you know about the stigma already? Is there anything that you know? Well done! Maybe you already know that the stigma has a very sticky surface which is ready for the pollen. You'll see a picture of a flower at the bottom of the screen and you will see right at the top is the stigma. I want you to just pause the video for a minute and just think with a partner at school or someone at home, how do you think the pollen might be moved from the anther to the stigma? The answer will follow on the next slide. So pollen sticks to insects and as they move around, the pollen sticks to the stigma. So a question you might ask is, how do flowers ensure that insects land on them? Well, flowers are scented and they have an attractive petal to attract the insects. During windy days, the pollen gets blown from the anther to the stigma. So what happens next? The style is hollow, so the pollen travels down into the ovary where it mixes with the eggs to produce new seeds. When the pollen mixes with the eggs to produce a new seed, this process is called fertilization. So on the screen in front of you is the mild and spicy task for today. You will need to cut out the sentences and stick them in your books in the right order. On the screen in front of you is a hot task for today. You will need to fill in the gaps in the sentences using the word bank at the bottom of the screen to help you. The Chili Challenge task for today is for you to create a poster describing in your own ways pollination and fertilization. In our lesson today, we're going to be looking at the life cycle of a plant. I want you to start by just thinking about what three things do you already know about life cycles? The life cycle of a flowering plant shows the changes that happen to the plant over the course of its lifetime. The main stages of the life cycle of a flowering plant are: number 1, germination; number 2, growing and flowering; number 3, pollination. Number 4, fertilization and seed formation. And number 5, seed dispersal. Let's find out a little bit more about what happens in each stage. Okay, so the first stage of the journey is germination. Germination is when a seed begins to grow. Stage 2, growing and flowering. Once the seed has germinated, the plant grows bigger and then forms a flower. The third stage of the journey is pollination. Pollination occurs when pollen from the anther is transferred to the stigma, often by an insect. The next stage is fertilization and seed formation. Fertilization happens when the pollen travels from the stigma down the style to the ovary. The pollen joins with an ovule to form a seed. The seed forms inside the ovary. Then we have the seed dispersal. Once the seeds are fully formed, the plant needs to disperse them. This means that the plant needs to move or transport the seeds away from the parent plant in some way so that they don't try all to grow in the same place. There are lots of different ways that seeds can be dispersed. Can you think of any ways the seeds might be dispersed? Your task for today is to order the stages of the life cycle of a flowering plant. More detail on this will follow on the next 2 slides.